You have a startup that teaches anti-racism.
Yeah.
But define your anti-racism, because it's not the same as like Ibram Kendi's, right?
No. So Ibram Kendi defines racism as basically the presence of inequity. So he defines inequity as material outcomes between groups. So if there's a difference in outcomes between different races, then that's proof of racial inequity, and that's proof of racism. Whereas our understanding of racism is psychological. We understand that racism or supremacist ways of thinking occur when an individual or group of people experience some kind of insecurity and then project that insecurity onto others in order to feel worthy. And our approach teaches people how to practice dealing with themselves in a holistic, healthy way so that they will be less likely to overcompensate.
Interesting. So what do you think about critical race theory? I know you're not a big fan.
I really don't think about critical race theory. I have to be honest with you. And there are probably many different reasons for that. As I've said this before the show, but I try not to be counter-dependent in my identity because that's also a form of dependence. People tend to think that codependence is the only form of dependence, but actually counter-dependence is also a form. So counter-dependence is when your identity is dependent upon countering someone else or something else. I'm not a fan of critical race theory because I'm not a fan of postmodernism. I think that there's no transcendence at the heart of postmodernism. I think that postmodernism has a point in that it critiques dominant structures in society which are susceptible to corruption just by nature of being. But the problem is that it becomes parasitic and begins to eat itself. And so there's no actual transcendence at the heart of it. So I'm critical of critical theory in general. But I don't really think about critical race theory because I'm just trying to get our anti-racism program out there.
If you avoid counter-dependence, why do you say you're anti-racist?
This is a great question. I love this question. Because we define racism not as another person or as a analysis of outcome, but as a state of being. Racism is a defect in relational ways of being. You're not relating to yourself properly, and you're not relating to others properly. And so to be able to counter that presupposes adopting a set of practices, a kind of lifestyle. And I think in that sense, it's less parasitic because at the heart of it, what you're trying to reach is transcendence.
Do you do like meditation and stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, how would you define racism then?
Again, for me, racism is a kind of relational defect. And it happens when a person is not in the right relationship with themselves. So they're feeling a lack of self-worth or contempt or...
But so like how does that present itself in society, for instance, right? So just to clarify, you have, Ibram Kendi's view about unequal outcomes.
Yeah.
You have the dictionary definition of prejudice or discrimination, positively or negative on the basis of race.
Yeah. I would say that we're more of that latter definition, but we're also more interested in psychological underpinnings of what causes that prejudice, what drives that prejudice in the first place. And where's that prejudice coming from? From a deep psychological perspective.
So, like, if a guy was walking down the street in LA and kicked a piece of the sidewalk that was up and busted his toe and was like, who's supposed to fix these sidewalks? And looks, and it's like, I bet it was this race of people, and looks, and those workers in the city tend to be percentually mostly a certain race.
Yeah.
And then they're like, I knew it, it's that race. Like, what's
that person is not well with himself.
And then you'd have to go deep into their individual psychology, just like what happened to you when you were a kid. Why are you blaming people for kicking?
Yeah, what's going on here? There's something going on. There's something else going on here.
But so here's my issue, right? With the reason why I do, think critical race theory is bad, or I should say, critical race.
I also think it's bad, by the way. I'm just not.
The reason I do focus on it is because I think it's overt racism.
Yeah, well, but again, that's what we ultimately, that's the beauty of it. That's what we ultimately tackle, because it doesn't matter whether you're black or white. You could be feeling some kind of weird self-worth issues and project, and it can manifest in different ways, but that's ultimately what's at the heart of it. In a way, we're kind of addressing critical race theory.
I love
also.
that.
That is, because when you think about these young people and their animosity and the things they project, it's rooted in this misunderstanding of what race is, and then a projected anger towards a certain race. So when I look at like critical race theory and applied principles, I think they're overtly racist. They certainly against Asian people, who are a small minority in this country, but yes, also against white people. They blame someone else.
But many passionate critical race theorists are white. So what do you think is going on with that?
Well, I think it's a lot of these people. It's tribal. So Ibram Kendi, for instance.
Yeah.
His belief is basically that if there's a law or policy that creates an unequal outcome based on race, it's a racist, systemically racist policy. Yet when it comes to New York's vaccine mandates, which disproportionately impact black people in New York, he's nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Because his whole thing is actually more, I'll put it this way. I would say I think he believes a lot of what he says.
Yeah.
But I think
so too.
I think he's sitting there going, yeah, but I'm not going to challenge this one instance where it's happening because the people who pay me also like that too.
I don't know, but what I'm wondering is, I get all that, but you just said critical race theorists are tribal and they're like anti-white people, but a lot of the people who buy into this are white. So
sure.
So what's going on there?
They're tribalistically espousing an ideology regardless of their own race. They're trying, and in fact, they say things like, as a white person, I recognize these things because they care more about what their tribe says than about who they are, what they experience, and what the actual problems are.
So what is their tribe? Who is their tribe? Who belongs to their tribe?
In the culture war, it's very strange, but there is very overarching tribal factions.
Yeah.
There's the left and the right, but that doesn't actually get to the heart of what the factions are. So Bill Maher is considered to be kind of in the left, but he's kind of in the middle of the culture war because he's very anti-woke.
Yeah.
He's very critical of the booster shots, but he despises Trump.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of in the middle. On the right, you actually have liberals, people who are economically left.
Sure.
So
it's all scrambled.
Yes, but it may actually just be authoritarian versus libertarian in a large way, not complete,
Okay.
not completely, because you certainly have people on the right who are authoritarian, who are, defying critical race theory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's like a big component of it is authoritarian versus libertarian.
Okay.
It may have a lot to do with individualist versus collectivist, but again, not absolute because there are elements of the fringe far right, ultra, nationalist. They're collectivist to a certain degree.
Okay.
So it really is hard to figure it out, but I would say it's kind of like yin yang. You know what I mean? It's not like there's two equal spaces that are opposing each other. It's like they actually swirl around and have similarities and differences. When I look at like Kendi and I look at Robin DiAngelo, but also just the Democratic Party, there's something that's very very obvious in that. There's a substantial lack of principles, and I'll shout out Texas for instance. They did the heartbeat bill.
Okay. And
all of a sudden we have people screaming "My body, my choice."
Okay.
Yet once again, I'll throw it back to New York. I'm like, yo, what about them mandating vaccines? Because I'm pro-choice. Even though I don't like abortion, I think it's bad, and I agree with a lot of conservatives on their suppositions. The problem is the government intervening for medical reasons, and it's like a very scary. Getting into nuance is difficult, but I look at Texas and I'm like, yeah, I understand the exemptions. I don't like having to go to the government for a medical, something that has to do with a very serious, embarrassing, humiliating, or troubling medical procedure. I'm gonna say the same thing about New York City, but all of a sudden now I see this establishment and this like left faction in the culture war has no interest in defending bodily autonomy or racist policy, which is the vaccine mandate in New York City. So when it comes, so throw it back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
The overwhelming amount of white people who are anti-white, I think it's mostly because they don't care about the ideas.
Okay.
If they did, my body, my choice would mean vax mandates too. What they care about is just being part of a collective that vies for power.
It makes me think of self-flagellation, like a religious, because we kind of talk about a metaphor like this is sort of religion. There's this lack of religion in society, so we've kind of some people have adopted a new faith, and people would beat themselves on the back with whips and stuff as part of like this self-flagellation, like I'm suffering, I'm so horrible, original sin, I'm a sinner, I must punish myself so that I'm not punished in hell or whatever. Yeah. And I think these people kind of have that same like self-punishment mindset. I don't know if this self-flagellation is just part of the human psyche that needs to be. I think there's agitated from time to time or something.
I think there's a few different things.
Definitely, it's like working out.
A few different things happening here. Some of these people, the less prominent, white people who are anti-white, probably don't actually care, but they're scared.
Okay.
They want to fit in. There are several prominent activists who were always on the left, But the left, as of today, is fundamentally different from the left of 10 years ago.
Okay.
So my favorite shout out is to Rap News by Juice Media. They had a video 10 years ago, if it was in end of 2010, where, oh man, it's almost 11 years ago now, where they say, you know, Hillary Clinton is bad. Alex Jones is calling out the commie Nazi fascists. You know, the Democrats and the Republicans, the establishment are trying to turn back the clock on freedom of speech and all that stuff. And I'm like, wow, if you were to make that today, you'd be a Trump supporter. If you said Hillary Clinton is bad and we need free speech, Julian Assange is good, and Alex Jones is speaking the truth. That was 10 years ago. That was the left.
Yeah.
So there's been this very serious shift. A lot of people all of a sudden are just like, Jay Leno said it the other day. You know, Jay Leno, a story came out, Jay Leno said, either you get in line with the woke or die. So that's...
Do you think that's true?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to be Jay Leno and be on TV, yes. Right. We're lucky enough that there exists an economic space where this show can function. But if the internet didn't exist, these conversations would be happening in secret.
But if the internet didn't exist, would any of this be happening?
Probably not.
So
right.
It's a double-edged sword.
But to be fair, something else would be happening, right? You know, before war, for instance, you know, Iraq war, the lies in the media. So it's factions emerge out of the chaos.
We narrowly avoided 1984 because we had the internet. The whole like a never-ending war over sea where it's a different enemy, and then now you're fighting a different enemy one day, and all of a sudden, 20 years later, they're like, and now we've always been at war with your Eastern, you know, did you ever read 1984?
Yeah.
And so that would have been Afghanistan and Iraq, but since we had the internet, we saw it all.
Oh.
We were like, nope.
Just to mention, so the first group, I think, are people who are scared.
Okay.
I shouldn't say the first group, but there's a group of people who are scared, and they'll just be like, whatever you say, leave me out of it. Then you have true believers who are just white people who are like, wow, I can't believe this is what, you know, has really happened, and I'm woke, I've awakened to the world. Then you have grifters. I genuinely think Robin DiAngelo is a grifter. Like, I think
you don't think she believes what she's writing?
Absolutely not.
Okay, why don't you think she believes it?
I think fundamentally her ideology is, at least the way she espoused it, is absolutely contradictory. If you are a white person who believes white people should step back.
But plenty of people believe contradictory things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Genuinely.
And so that's a cognitive dissonance where I will challenge someone's you know, whether they actually believe something. And boy, do people go nuts when they realize it. One example of the difference between me and someone like that is I had been saying for a while that, look, I think if a business wants to mandate vaccines, depending on the scale of that business, I think it's actually fine because I don't want to impose my will on a mom and pop shop where it's like an older guy and he's like, look, I'm hiring 2 or 3 people. I want them to be vaccinated. I'm like, I don't want to infringe on the rights of just some regular working class dude. Yeah. Then a week later, I said, it is the people of New York who are upholding the edict making this happen. If the regular people said no to the mandates, all of this would stop. And then I said, well, certainly both of those ideas can't be true. So perhaps it's wrong for businesses to mandate their employees get the vaccine. Okay. As opposed to what we see with the My Body, My Choice people, where they completely just say, F you, I'm not going to argue about New York. It doesn't exist to me. Or they won't even bring it up.
Yeah, but I don't think that makes a person a grifter. Not to be semantical. That doesn't make you a grifter.
I suppose I can then say about Dangelo is that based on what I've heard from her and seen from her, I just believe she's lying. Okay. Like, I do not feel that what she says is genuine.
I have no idea. So, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's all trying to read people, I guess. Yeah. And
I think she had a hard childhood.
Yeah.
And I think that plays a huge role.
Elaborate.
Well, I read in passing somewhere that her father wasn't in the picture, abandoned the family. She grew up in going from like moving constantly, and also her mother was sort of incompetent, and she dealt with issues of abandonment and identity issues at a very young age. And I have almost no doubt that is playing a huge role in all of this.
So it's possible she's just not that smart.
Or it's possible that she is spiritually suffering, and this is how it's manifesting.
High intelligence, but with a lot of pain. That's a very dangerous recipe too.
I don't think she displays
Anakin
high
Skywalker.
Intelligence. Well, so how do you deal with then? You know, you have very prominent people, very wealthy people in big institutions that are implementing these ideas at an ever escalating rate of
Well, I think one of the ways you deal with it is you guard yourself as much as possible from falling prey to some of the shortcomings and blind spots, but you don't do that simply by propositional exposition of facts, who's right, who's wrong, but you actually do it by recognizing the complexity of the human condition, your capacity to fall prey to that, your capacity to become susceptible to that way of thinking, and and giving yourself the practices required to not fall prey to it, because it's so easy to fall prey to it in a way.
What are some of those practices?
Meditation, for sure. Shadow work from like Carl Jung's philosophy.
What's that?
Shadow work is when you recognize what's triggering your ego. Usually our egos are triggered by other people when they're doing something that we don't like, and that thing is present within us. Now, there's a difference between saying to a person, your behavior is reckless, your behavior is problematic, and saying to that same person who engaged in that reckless behavior that you're trash. Those are two very different things. Once you start engaging in the latter kind of vocabulary, you set yourself up on a pedestal, and you set yourself up as better than that person, as if that behavior is foreign to you, as if you're not capable of engaging in that same behavior, and you've actually started down the path of supremacist ways of thinking. In the literal sense, you think that you're supreme, you think that you're superior to that person. So you do shadow work you can do it in many ways, but one of the ways you can do it is noticing when your ego is triggered and recognizing how the behavior that someone else engaged in, or the impulse that someone else is operating out of, is also existing within you. And you'll see that same behavior the next time. You'll still say it's reckless and problematic, but your ego won't be triggered by it, so you'll be less likely to other that person when you critique that person.
And then I would imagine your criticism will be more likely to be taken by them.
Exactly. They'll be able to receive it, more likely to receive it. There's no guarantee to anything, but there will be more likely to receive it.
Sounds like we just need to replace CRT with philosophy in these schools.
Yeah.
Yes.
Self-reflection.
Yeah.
Is
that's our motto.
Yeah. So instead, I think what we end up getting is too many people in the United States don't want to be involved in any of this.
Yes.
Fighting is hard, it's taxing, and I think you can look to the animal kingdom. Fighting is never the first choice. Mm-hmm. So here's something interesting. The aggression of an animal can be determined on where it lives or where it operates. So burrowing animals, for instance, when you encounter them in a burrow, they will fight you. They're aggressive. They have one dimension to move in. So there's no escaping. Birds don't attack you because birds can just leave, and leaving is way easier. So what ends up happening for regular people is that there are vested interests in spreading CRT and its ideology. There's money to be made for sure. There are true believers. There are people who are scared and just going along with it, thinking they'll fit in. And then corporations say, look, this is what's on social media. We think this plays well. We don't want to rock the boat. And then it creates this social pressure where over time, people are just like, I don't want a fight. So they give in to the most aggressive ideology. And that leads us down a very, very dark and authoritarian path.
But then that thing actually blows up in their faces, and then they come call us.
No, but I mean...
In many cases. They've brought in CRT into the staff, into the training of their people. It wreaks havoc in the workplace. And then they have to start all over again. Do
you have any specific examples, like a story? You don't got to name the companies or anything like that, but you want to give us an example of something that may have happened?
I mean, I can just tell you in general, we do demo interviews with companies all the time, and they report back to us. It's a very simple script that they report back to us, and it's repeated all the time. We brought in this very typical approach to diversity and inclusion training, and it did not go over well, and now we are trying to figure out what to do, and we heard you on some podcast.
But how does
that is the life cycle in many cases.
Just what happened specifically
people were self-segregated. The diversity consultant told them to segregate themselves based upon race. A lot of people don't like that. Oh yeah, that's standard. The consultant tells them, or just assumes, the lived experiences of all these people based upon skin color. A lot of people, black and white, don't like that. So I wouldn't underestimate the amount of rumblings that may be happening in these companies, even though you're not necessarily seeing that on Twitter, but it's definitely happening.
That makes me laugh, and it kind of makes me happy.
Yeah.
To hear that the things that we see as bad, for the reasons we see it as bad, are being reported back to you as that they are bad and they don't work.
Yes.
And it's like vindicating.
Yeah.
But it's also cool that you guys can come in and kind of fix that.
Yeah. Try to.
So what advice would you give? Like, how do you work with a company that contacts you?
We have online courses, but we also have workshops. Ultimately, we are a startup, and we're trying to get to the place where we can create a suite of practices for organizations. So, a one-time workshop, and our workshops are pretty dope, I have to say. But it's like a full-day workshop, and that doesn't translate into sustainable practice. It's just not the nature of a workshop. So what we want to ultimately do is get our stuff into as of training into the learning management systems of corporations, so that when they're onboarding their employees, they can use our practices, eventually be able to service them with some of our coaches who can check in to make sure they're doing those self-awareness practices throughout the months, weeks, quarters, etc. So ultimately, we want people to start practicing. I mean, the emphasis is on the practice. I had a conversation recently with someone who was talking about policy, and they were like, we wrote a statement, because this is also very popular, as I'm sure you know, like, let's make a statement about how we are super anti-racist, and and I'm like, that's not a policy, that's a statement. A policy is a set of practices that an institution operates according to, so we can have a long-term conversation about what those practices should look like, again, with the objective of affording that sense of self-awareness, not overcompensating for your insecurities, creating a culture of belonging. We can actually talk about how to create those practices, but this is not a policy, it's just a statement.
I remember that famous George Carlin sketch where he just goes on stage and says every single racial slur he can think of, and then he actually calls Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor the N-word, which, like,
before my time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like early 90s. How old are you?
I'm 28.
Oh, okay, so maybe...
I was probably too young to watch.
1 or 2 years old.
But it might have been like 94.
I was 1 year old.
Right, exactly. But, even when I see that, I'm like, wow, I can't believe he would even jokingly say that about these guys.
Yeah.
But everyone in the crowd laughs.
Yeah.
There was no big controversy over him doing it, because the point he was making when he said it was that you need to understand the person behind the words, because the words themselves don't affect you, sticks and stones, etc. So I bring that up because I wonder, in a lot of these corporate settings, someone might say an off-color joke, without the intent to actually demean someone.
Yeah.
But then someone might get offended by it, triggering these sessions.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering.
Well, I don't think that's what's triggering, primarily.
You don't think so?
No.
Like, we've heard stories about people who are like, oh, I said a joke at work, and now they're making me go to like a diversity training.
I think that's a lot. I think that, like, companies are conservative, and they're like, oh, we don't want you to sue us, so that's why they're doing that. I don't think it's like driven by any real thing.
No, I completely agree with you. I just mean, like, someone said a naughty word, we might get sued. Quick, put them in a diversity training to protect ourselves.
Yeah, but I don't think I agree. But unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, the end of critical race theory doesn't solve for that problem, because the institutions will always be like that.
Right. Not to mention CRT segregates people, which I think makes that worse.
Yeah, well, it does make it worse. Yeah.
Oh. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.